Welcome to the Nourished Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of growing a healthy child. Here's your host, registered dietitian and childhood nutrition expert, Jill Castle.
Hey friends, welcome back to the Nourished Child Podcast. Jill here, and I hope you are having a great day. Can you believe it is December already? It's hard to believe that we are in the last month of 2024. As you think about 2025 and think about your goals for the new year, keep in mind that I have lots of nutrition and feeding resources on my website, thenourishedchild.com. I also have courses and PDF guidebooks available there, as well as 6 different books on Amazon.com. My latest book, Kids Thrive at Every Size, has been getting wonderful feedback. I hope it's been a help to you. If you haven't gotten your copy yet, head over to Amazon or to your local bookstore, probably even your library at this point, and get your copy. That book is also on audio. So if you are somebody who likes to listen instead of read a book, there's me actually reading the book for the audiobook. So maybe you'll like that. If you have had the book and you'd like to write a review, I would really appreciate that. You can head over to Amazon and write a review on the book page. You just scroll down to the reviews and there's a little prompt that says write a review, and you can give it a 5-star review. Actually, most of my reviews have been 5-star reviews. So, but then also to type in something, a comment, a one-liner, whatever, you feel inspired to do, how the book affected you, how it helped you, how it maybe helped you see things in a new light. Any of that is super appreciated. As you enter 2025 or think about it and thinking about your goals, remember I also operate a small private practice where I help families one-on-one with either children in smaller bodies. I help many families with children of larger bodies, children who are struggling with body image, eating behaviors that feel unhealthy. And I also help parents introduce solids in infancy as well as deal with picky eating. I've been around the block a long time, so there is a lot that I can help you with. You can find out that information on my website, jillcastle.com. Anywho, let's move into this show. I have my friend, colleague, and pediatric dietitian colleague, Malina Malkani, on the show. She's a pediatric registered dietitian, best-selling author, speaker, and single mom of 3 behind the Instagram and TikTok handle, Healthy Mom, Healthy Kids. She's a top nutrition influencer dedicated to educating her audience about infant and child nutrition. She's a trusted expert in local and national media outlets and owns a nutrition consulting company and private practice. She is the author of Simple and Safe Baby-Led Weaning, How to Integrate Foods, Manage Portion Sizes, and Identify Allergies. And she has a brand new book called Safe and Simple Food Allergy Prevention, a baby-led feeding guide to starting solids and introducing top allergens. We, of course, are having a conversation about food allergy prevention. Here's Malina. Malina, I am so excited to have you on the Nourished Child Podcast. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much. I have been a long time fan of this podcast, as you know. So this is such a pleasure.
Well, you have a big book coming out very shortly, and perhaps even has already launched by the time this airs. But before we dive into it, and it's going to be all about food allergy prevention in babies, can you share with the audience who you are and the work that you do?
Yes, absolutely. So, my name is Malina. I run Healthy Mom, Healthy Kids on Instagram, also TikTok. I'm a pediatric registered dietitian with a small New York-based private practice where I see mostly infants and toddlers, but really kids of all ages. And I'm the author of Simple and Safe Baby-Led Weaning, which came out in 2020. And it came out just actually a couple of weeks before the pandemic, which was really interesting as I look back, because at that time, parents were feeding their kids in these silos and having new babies and sort of isolated in that process. And I'm a single mom to three girls myself. They're now 11, 13, and 15. And I just remember so well when they were babies. They're all born within about 3.5 years of each other. But one of the best ways for me as a new dietitian, but also as a new mom, to learn about starting solids and to learn about all the different developmental stages of infancy was to sit there with friends and other babies with the baby in the bucket and just have these conversations about the process. So families at that time, when Simple and Safe Baby-Led Weaning came out, they didn't have that. So my Instagram kind of just out of necessity, and it was sort of a natural, organic situation where people were coming to my account as a bit of a hub and sending me pictures and videos of their babies, and I would share those and we would have conversations about starting solids. And so it was lovely because it became a community where we can learn and grow together. So out of that, I've learned a lot from my followers, from my patients about what it is they're looking for and what helps them throughout the process the most.
Before we dive into the topic of your book, I'm curious. So before the pandemic, there was quite a polarization between spoon feeding and baby-led weaning. Tell me what you learned about that as you wrote your book, but also just thinking about that sort of these two camps. What are your perspectives on that? And what have you learned about that?
Yeah. It's really interesting. So I love baby-led weaning. I love it as a process of starting solids. I found it naturally with my second and third babies, just kind of out of necessity because we were all doing the same thing. We were all, eating the same foods, and it felt like a natural thing. But I don't think that baby-led weaning is the be-all, end-all of starting solids. And I think that, that polarization and that sort of idea of quote-unquote pure baby-led weaning, which you hear about a lot, which I hear about a lot from followers and from patients, doesn't do a lot of service to families, because at the end of the day, and what the research shows, is there's no perfect way to start solids. There are so many wonderful ways to start a baby on solid foods. And purees, traditional spoon feeding of purees, and baby-led weaning each have so many potential benefits that they offer. And depending on, even just day to day, depending on the baby's mood or what the bandwidth is of the childcare, the caregiver, or what foods you have available that day, those needs can kind of shift and change. And so having that kind of feeding flexibility is really, at the end of the day, what I think benefits families the most. And that's not even addressing more medically complex children that, for whom baby-led weaning may not be the best fit starting off. So all that being said, I try to strive in my work to be a little bit more of a kind of a centrist voice in this space, where we can support both types of feeding. We can support a combined approach to starting solids. And that's actually why in my new book, instead of calling it a baby-led weaning guide to starting solids, I call it a baby-led feeding guide to starting solids. Because I've come to the I don't know if it's a realization, but just a decision that baby-led feeding as a term is a little bit more inclusive, and it can offer families the best of all worlds. And so I support both types of feeding and give guidance on both in my new book.
That's great. I love it, because it should be baby-led, right?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously the
Yeah.
parent has to, decide on what's being fed and prep that meal. But even when we think about feeding styles and practices for older children, it's child led in a lot of ways. I mean, the parent role obviously is a significant role in making those decisions. But when the child is leading, they seem to do better, right?
That's one of the things I love about your work is that it takes that concept of baby-led, child-led into all the ages and stages. Because in a lot of ways, it's one of the reasons why I love baby-led weaning so much. I think it's kind of an approach to parenting that you can extrapolate to so many different parts of parenting and not just feeding.
Yeah.
Which is wonderful. It's wonderful. But it also, when we say, when I hear people say, well, that's not pure baby-led weaning, if a child is being spoon-fed, what I think is that spoon feeding can absolutely be baby-led too. It just depends on the how. And are you feeding responsibly? Are you looking for that child's cues for hunger and waiting for the child to lean in and open their mouth and take the bite? Or are you kind of distract feeding and shoving in a bite when the kid isn't looking and, and that kind of thing. So that's something that I've always loved about your work is supporting that important piece of feeding.
Thank you. Thank you. So, okay. So as you came to this new book, and I'm curious as to, and let's just title, the book is called Safe and Simple Food Allergy Prevention, a baby-led feeding guide to starting solids and introducing top allergens. Why did you write this book and why now?
So since 2020, when Simple and Safe Baby-Led Weaning came out, and my own practice has deepened and I've learned more and more about food allergy prevention and the amazing research that we now have that we didn't have, say, 10, 15 years ago. And even since then, there's been some incredible advancements in this area. It has become clearer than ever to me that food allergy prevention needs to be front and center in the conversations around starting solids. And it isn't yet. Baby-led weaning is a big trend. It's been trending now for maybe 5, 10 years, maybe even 15. Food allergy prevention is not trending. And I'm doing my best to make it trend. But the reason why I'm so passionate about it is that the window of protection for food allergy prevention is so short and fleeting. And when parents miss it, when we miss it, it goes by in a flash. And so when they don't have that information at that really important moment early on in infancy and they miss that window, it passes. And so I wanted to bring food allergy prevention into the conversation around baby-led feeding, around baby-led weaning, around starting solids as front and center as I possibly could in a one-stop feeding resource that has it all in there, including recipes and meal plans and all the practical things that we need to make it easy and doable.
Sure. Well, I don't think there's another book out there centered on food allergy prevention. So this is definitely filling a gap in the literature, which is always a good thing, I think. Let me ask you though, I'm sure that parents are out there who are starting solids, and I can think of a couple of my own clients who are in this stage of life. They're wondering, can you really prevent food allergies from developing in a baby?
It's a really, really good question. And I wish that I had a better answer to this question because food allergy prevention is not a guarantee. And it always breaks my heart when there are families who said, I did everything, quote unquote, right in this process, and I still ended up with a food allergic child. And that can happen. Mm-hmm. And that needs to be said because people need to know that and to manage their expectations going into it. So that's the bad news. The good news is that in particular, with regard to peanut and a little bit less so, but still with regard to egg, which are two of the top 9 allergens responsible for over 90% of all of the food allergies in the US, we have really wonderful research pointing to the ability of early introduction of these foods, and not just early introduction, but also repeated exposure to these foods to help prevent the development of peanut and egg allergy. And I could put some numbers to that. I mean, with peanut, it always blows my mind. There's a fascinating study from 2015 called the LEAP study, the Learning Early About Peanut study. And what this study found was that offering peanut foods to babies regularly and early, starting between about 4 and 6 months of age, helps reduce the likelihood of peanut allergy by 86%.
That's impressive.
It's impressive. It's really impressive. And we don't know as much about the other allergens, top allergens, but there's really good reason to believe that as we learn more about them and more research becomes available, the same will hold true for them as well. We have some good data on fish. We have some good data on some of the other allergens, egg for sure. But peanut and egg for now are the ones we know the most about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What, when you think about, you mentioned introducing early and often and consistently, let's get to the early part first. You said 4 to 6 months. Now, most parents out there have been told by their pediatrician and by their dietitian not to start solids until 6 months. So talk to those families out there that are saying, wait, I thought I was supposed to wait till 6 months. What is she talking about introducing peanut at 4 months?
Yes, this is an area where I think collectively as a community, as a medical community, we need to come together a little bit better around our messaging, because there's different sort of goals and priorities that seem to be warring with each other, when in fact, they're really not. It just involves some nuance in explaining what we mean when we say starting at around 6 months of age. But here's the bottom line. Most of the larger health organizations recommend starting solids at around 6 months of age when a baby is showing signs of readiness for solid foods. Sometimes that's a little bit earlier than 6 months. We're not talking about starting on the 6-month birthday. We're talking about looking for signs of readiness, like being able to sit upright with minimal support, good head and neck control, being able to bring larger objects up to the mouth, and showing an interest in food. And so for most babies, those are going to emerge at around 6 months. Mm-hmm. Now, for high-risk babies, there seems to be more of a benefit of starting with especially peanut and egg to some extent too, a little bit earlier, between 4 and 6 months of age. So sometimes that will be the recommendation, is to start a little bit earlier. And so for the people that have been told, but we're supposed to breastfeed exclusively for the first 6 months, that can be really confusing. But it's really helpful to look at some of the research that we have that's looking at early peanut intro between 4 and 6 months of age and what the effects of that are on breastfeeding. And what we see is that it doesn't affect early peanut intro between 4 and 6 months. It doesn't affect the duration of breastfeeding, nor does it affect growth and nourishment of the baby. Because these are really tiny amounts that we're talking about. 2 teaspoons of peanut foods per day, or at a time as a serving, are considered to be protective, 2 to 3 times a week. It's not a lot of food. It's a very small amount of food. So it's helpful to sort of look at all of that nuance and say breastfeeding exclusively and allergen introduction, exclusively in quotes, can peacefully coexist, and we can sort of go at multiple goals at one time and achieve them at the same time without compromising one or the other.
It doesn't have to be an either or conversation. It can be an and. So just to follow up with that, though, if a family, it's 2 grams, right? 2 grams of peanut exposure. Yeah. What does that look like through a practical lens? If you are nursing, okay, let's say if you're nursing, you're breastfeeding, how are you getting that 2 grams in a day? And if you are formula feeding with a bottle, how are you doing that?
Yeah. Yeah. And so that also speaks to the importance of the baby's readiness for the solid foods. Because no one's recommending to put these allergens in the bottle. We don't want to put them in the bottle. What we want to do is for peanut in particular. So peanut is an incredibly nutrient dense, wonderful early food, but it's also a choking hazard. Whole nuts, obviously I know an infant can't be fed a whole nut, nor is it safe to feed a glob of peanut butter because it's very sticky and viscous, and then that could seal an airway if it's fed in a glob. So what we want to do is thin it out. So if you have 2 teaspoons, around a tablespoon of breast milk or formula or water, just to thin it out and feed it on a spoon. That's something that can be very easily and practically done for a baby between the ages of 4 and 6 months who is breastfeeding or formula fed. That 2 grams a day, I love talking about dose for food allergy prevention with healthcare practitioners, because this is a really super fascinating area. In my opinion, I don't know that it's that helpful for families to go deep on dosage in terms of allergen. 2 grams of peanut protein fed 2 to 3 times per week is shown to be protective per the LEAP study. About a third of an egg fed, around 2 to 3 times a week is shown to be protective. This is per the consensus guidelines from 2021 that looked at multiple studies on early egg exposure. But what we see is that, instead of sort of trying to hit a certain gram dosage, babies don't eat grams of protein. They eat foods, right? Because they like them, or because they're hungry, or because they're in a situation where they feel comfortable eating that food. So, and what we see is that it seems that regular exposure to these allergens is more impactful than trying to hit a certain threshold or a target dose every day. And I worry that if we talk too much about 2 grams of protein, it can stress out families who then think that they need to force feed or, beg, bribe, cajole, airplane in the food in order to hit that target dose and over medicalize it. So, in my book with the recipes, which we'll talk about, I took that deep dive on every single recipe and went and calculated every single gram of protein, because I wanted that information to be available for people who like to nerd out on the science and they want to know exactly how many grams of protein are in each serving of the food. But I don't want families to focus on that. I don't think it's ultimately helpful. Just feed the foods that have multiple allergens once they've been introduced and tolerated regularly, and leave it at that.
So here's sort of a case study question for you. You have a child who is high risk for peanut allergy. So the recommendations would indicate early introduction at around 4 months of age, correct? What if that baby is not ready for solids?
Yeah.
So then what does a family do?
Yep. Couple things. First of all, so the recommendation is between 4 and 6 months. Not necessarily, again, to start right at 4 months. Would it be advantageous? Probably, to start on the earlier side of that. But if the baby is clearly developmentally not ready yet, there's a few things. First of all, waiting even a week in this period of time, a phase of growth, can make a world of difference. They grow so rapidly and develop so rapidly. A new skill can emerge even in a matter of days. So sometimes waiting a week is still going to put you in that advantageous 4 to 6 month window, which is great. The other thing that's really important is that if a baby is high risk, what's going to indicate high risk, the strongest risk factor for food allergies, is severe eczema in a baby. So if you have a baby who has severe eczema, the reason, we think, there's a lot we don't know about food allergy, but researchers surmise that the reason why severe eczema is the strongest risk factor for food allergies is because the skin acts as a barrier against allergen exposure. But when allergens are entering through that broken skin that's broken as a result of eczema, it's much more likely to open up a route of sensitization to that allergen, which can sort of open up the path toward allergy development.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a baby with eczema and the baby's not quite ready yet for oral introduction of that allergen, which, when we process it through the gut, that reduces the risk of allergy development. Then things like if you do eat peanuts in your home, washing your hands really well before you change the baby's diaper, or, keeping peanut and egg and other allergen foods confined to one area of the house, just to cut down on the likelihood that those allergens enter the baby's system first through broken skin is helpful. Because if you think about it, like if you have a tub of diaper cream or a tub of lotion, you just ate a bunch of peanuts, you have that residue from the peanut protein on your hands, and then you stick your hand in the lotion and rub it on the baby, then it does increase the likelihood that allergen will enter through broken skin.
That's fascinating, because I don't think anybody has really talked about that in the past in terms of like our education as pediatric dietitians. We never really talked about, allergens entering through the skin, breaks in the skin. So it's very fascinating.
I find it so fascinating. So fascinating too, because we, at the end of the day, we really don't know why food allergies develop or how.
Right.
And it's likely quite multifactorial. There's likely many different reasons why, but this seems to be the hypothesis that is the most likely. But I will say it is, I always hesitate to talk about this, because what I worry about is then that people will say, well, early allergen introduction is just for high-risk babies then. And we do families a real disservice if that's what they take from this conversation, because a quarter of babies who develop food allergy never even had eczema. So, food allergy prevention needs to be for every baby, early introduction for every baby. And there's another stat that I think it always blows my mind, maybe even more than the 86% reduction of the likelihood of peanut allergy due to early peanut intro. And this is that for every month that we wait to introduce peanut past 6 months of age, the potential protective effects of early intro are reduced in some cases by 30% per month. So when we talk about how fleeting that window is of protection, that's no joke. It's early. We need, it's not, we just started solids and the baby is around 6 months of age, and so we'll wait a few months to introduce peanut. But no, I really want to encourage families to get the show on the road as soon as possible after the baby has started a few first foods.
Yeah. I agree. What are there other risk factors that you haven't mentioned, like family history? That was always sort of one of the ones back in the day that, if you had a family, is that playing out to be still the case or not?
Not really. So,
okay, interesting.
Again, it's really interesting. The NIAID calls out severe eczema and existing egg allergy or another diagnosed food allergy as the strongest risk factors, with severe eczema being the strongest. Mild to moderate eczema are less strong risk factors, or more, mild, moderate. Having family history in one or both parents, like you said, used to be considered a major risk factor, but it's not anymore.
Yeah.
It's really, really low on the totem pole of risk factors and really barely increases risk, which actually is quite maybe comforting for a lot of families who maybe have a little bit more anxiety if they themselves have food allergies. It really doesn't much increase the baby's risk of developing one as well.
Yeah. Okay. So we covered early. We covered often, because I believe you said 3 times a week.
For high risk. Yeah.
For high risk. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. If not high risk, once or twice for the other allergens. peanut, I like to just recommend twice a week to cover bases if the baby is moderate or lower risk. And egg is such a nutritious, incredibly nourishing food anyway. Twice a week is great, but there are no recommendations on the number of eggs babies can have per week. So, yeah.
What about consistently? Elaborate on that, please.
Yeah. So this is so fascinating to me as well, because it's a little bit counterintuitive. I think a lot of families think, I don't want to introduce early and often during infancy because I want to wait for the child's immune system to develop before I do that. But that's counterintuitively wrong, because the infant immune system is actually quite malleable. And that's when we want to be introducing these allergens and training the system to recognize them as safe, and then consistently continue to offer those allergens to maintain that tolerance during infancy. And the consistency is really important to up to, at least a year. And then the LEAP study fed those allergens through age 5. So consistently, three times a week. So, as much as you can keep them in the diet going forward, the good news is all of these allergenic foods are really common, nutrient-dense, minimally processed, healthy foods that are, sort of easy to work into the diet if there's something that culturally and, traditionally you eat in your family. Right. So in my so I have 8 weeks of meal plans in the book. And what those meal plans do is they program each of these allergens at least twice a week, if not more often, into the diet in 2 meals per day. Just to, if you want someone to do all the planning and thinking for you, that's been done somewhere. You don't have to follow it, but it's a resource that's there for you.
A question just occurred to me about the LEAP study, and just looking forward. So that came out in the 2019, I think, or 2018, the first one.
2015. Yeah.
2015. So we're 10 years out almost from that study. Are we seeing reduction in food allergies in children? Is there any research that we know of has anyone done that research yet?
Yeah. Such a great question. So in May of this past year, there was a wonderful study that came out called LEAP Trio, where the same researchers took a look at those same babies. So there are about 640 in the original LEAP study. They were able to track down 500 of them and followed them, around 500. And what they found was that 10 years later, or over 10 years later, at around age 12, the babies who had been in the early introduction group were still enjoying the protective effects and had a much lower prevalence of peanut allergy when you compare them to the avoidance group. So that study it's really heartening, because what it shows us is that peanut allergy prevention works, but also that it lasts. It's really interesting. Now, in terms of your question about prevalence of overall allergies, to my knowledge, we haven't seen a reduction overall. I don't know if we have those surveys yet, actually.
Yeah.
That look at, the larger population.
Yeah.
But that study was so heartening, I think, to take a look at this and say, this is an evidence-based method that works, and it works into the future.
Yeah. So calming for families, who might have worries, food allergies in their families or in their children. So let's go. So one of the things you said at the top of the show was around, we don't really have evidence around whether you should spoon feed or whether you should baby-led wean. Like, the method is sort of kind of this loosey-goosey world of what's your preference and what's trending right now. But there's no scientific evidence that says you must use the spoon or you must baby-led wean, right? To that end, there's really where are we with waiting 3 days between new food introductions? Where's the science on that? What's the current recommendation?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of, one of the trends of this interview, I think, is that the guidelines have changed a lot. There's been so many changes to feeding guidelines, whether it's food allergy prevention or just starting solids and infant feeding in general. Pediatricians and healthcare providers used to recommend, even when my oldest was born, introducing new foods one at a time, whether they were top allergens or not, and then waiting in between to look for reactions. And that old advice is now considered outdated. And just to explain the rationale as to why, really the goal, one of the goals, there's many goals to infant feeding and to starting solids, but one of them is to encourage a diverse diet as early as possible. We need more research on diet diversity, but the research that we have is really exciting. I can't remember if I mentioned this already, but the more diverse a diet in an infant, the less likely they are to develop a food allergy during the first decade of life by a third. And that's just diet diversity. That's just offering lots of different foods. So if we're offering a non-top allergenic food one every 3 days, it's going to take a really long time to get to that diet diversity, which is so helpful for such a variety of different factors, not only food allergy prevention, in terms of nutrient intake, in terms of expanding a child's palate, getting exposed to different flavors and textures, and exploring food and being drawn into family meals. These are things that we want to see. So that old single food introductions of non-top allergens, no more. That being said, single food introductions of top allergens, so those top 9, peanut, egg, wheat, cow's milk, fish, shellfish, sesame, and tree nuts, and soy. Introducing those one at a time and waiting in between. Also, there's no evidence that you have to do that. It's kind of a more common sense, conservative approach to allergen introduction that if there is a reaction, is going to make it a lot easier to figure out which is the responsible food. So in my practice for higher risk babies, I do like to recommend that. I think it can be quite calming for parents, but some parents are like, oh, I'm just going to motor through.
Yeah.
And that's fine too. What we want is to get the allergens in. We want to get them in.
Yeah.
So, my book has a 9-day allergen introduction plan, but it's quite flexible. So, if you want to do this in the morning, if you want to make allergen introductions happen in the morning, you only have a couple mornings a week to do that. You can stretch it out as long as you need to. But the point is there are options and lots of flexibility.
Yeah. Yeah. I tend to be a little on the conservative side too, with the top 9 allergens, just that let's give it a couple of days and just make sure. And I don't know if that's common sense or if that's like I've been so ingrained, like if there is a reaction, we want to be really clear about what it is that we're reacting to. I recently had a client whose, baby's skin kind of blew up after having mango, strawberries, tomatoes, all in one meal. And I was like, I think that might be the acid in all those foods. I do not think this is a food allergy reaction. But still, I mean, families are navigating this watchfulness. On the one hand, they're trying to be more aggressive than we've been in the past, right? So it's like driving down the highway fast and looking left and right, that it's dim, it's dark outside. Is something happening? Do I need to react? And I think this is where your book is going to be so helpful to families because it's evidence-based. You're giving families sort of the step-by-step clear instructions about, what they do for a child who doesn't have high risk factors, what you do for a child who does have high risk factors. So to that end, dive in a little bit about your book so that families can really understand, like, walk us through sort of the framework of the book without giving the book away. I know you have meal plans. I know you have the 9-day food allergen introduction. I know you've done a lot of research on it, but help us sort of understand the flow and how you've organized it and what parents can expect to find when they pick it up.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the beginning of the book, I wanted to provide all of the foundational information around starting solids because that needs to be there first in order for us to be able to effectively follow these food allergy prevention guidelines and goals. So that's all there. Things like first foods, signs of readiness, when to start, what you're going to need, all the practical stuff that makes it easy. So that's all in there. There's also kind of the history of how we got here. So because it can be a little jarring, especially if you have like you have a mom or an aunt or someone who the last time they fed a baby was 20, 30 years ago, and the guidelines were a complete 180 in difference. So the guidelines back then were to delay allergen introduction. So I explain kind of how we got there quickly, because it can be for folks who just want to get right to it. That part can be boring. So I got through that quickly. And then there is a lot of the latest and greatest science on food allergy prevention. So what we're looking for in terms of early introduction, how to do it consistently, what are the signs and symptoms that you're looking for? There's a lot of comfort in that area because I think a lot of families are so afraid of their child having a severe reaction. And in reality, what we've learned from the LEAF study and what we've learned through food allergy prevention is that severe reactions during infancy are extremely uncommon. They can happen. Anaphylaxis can happen. But really, if a child is going to be food allergic, really what we see are mild reactions. So something like hives or vomiting, those are the two most common. So I talk about that. I talk about how there have been no recorded deaths on first introduction. Scary to talk about, but important to say. So there's a lot of comfort. There's a lot of information too on the differences between gagging and choking. So what you're looking for in terms of that. And then it goes into the practical side. So it gives you first foods and how to serve them, non-top allergenic ones. Lots of information on the important nutrients, key nutrients during infancy and how to get those in. And then how to introduce the top 9 allergens, how and when, the whole sort of process, 8 weeks of meal plans that then help you keep those allergens in the diet at the cadence that is recommended for food allergy prevention. And then the fun part, which was really fun for me and for my girls, is developing 80 recipes that contain at least one, but usually multiple top allergens. That part was a big labor of love because, as a mom of 4, I know as a mom of 3, making more than one meal at any given time is such a recipe for burnout and exhaustion. I really wanted to take the potential for that out of the equation. So the recipes that are there are recipes that you can feed the entire family. So your partner, your toddlers, your teens, your tweens, and your baby all at the same time.
That's great.
And I just felt like that was a really key part because that process of making more than one meal at a time, I don't ever want to do that again. I did that a little bit in my early days, and I much failed. So
no, that's so amazing. It sounds like a terrific book, Malina. Thank you for writing something like this for families. I think it's going to do really well and help a lot of families. Anything you want to message to parents about the book or about just general infant feeding and allergy prevention before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I guess just one more bit of comfort. I hope it will be comforting. I think a lot of families go into starting solids and food allergy prevention with a lot of fear. And one more stat that a lot of families I work with find really comforting is that the odds are really good that your baby won't react. A little bit less than 3% of babies develop a food allergy during infancy.
Mm-hmm.
But when you flip that on its head, that also means that more than 97% won't.
Mm-hmm.
So the odds are really good that this will be smooth sailing. And starting solids, for me, at least as a parent, I love your take on this too, Jill, but it was one of the most gratifying, joyful, wonderful parts of parenting, just to see that baby's face experience a bite of, their first bite of mango or their first bite of something that was so delicious to them. It's such a beautiful time. And so I want parents to experience that joy as well and enjoy it.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of joy. We call this the honeymoon phase of feeding and fearless feeding. And it's that time of life where your baby really does enjoy eating and nearly everything you offer them. And it's makes parents feel really good inside. And there's a lot of joy between both baby and parent. So it's a wonderful time. Yes. Where can my listeners find you, find your book?
Yes. So the book you can find at foodallergypreventionbook.com. And you can connect with me at healthy.mom.healthy.kids on Instagram, on TikTok. And I love to connect with you there. So please find me.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Malina. Always, always, always such a pleasure to talk with you.
Oh, the pleasure was mine. Thank you so much, Jill.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode with Malina Malkani. If you have a little one or you know somebody who has a little one, head over and grab her book, Food Allergy Prevention. You can also find that book on her website, malinamalkani.com, or go to a book website devoted to the book called foodallergypreventionbook.com. I hope you have a great week. I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Don't forget, this audio episode or podcast episode is also available on YouTube, where you can watch us talking together. Don't forget, give that child in your life a loving squeeze today. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Nourished Child Podcast, where the #1 goal is to help you grow a nourished child inside and out.